Once again, Bernie Sanders shows that he understands something implicitly that neither President Obama nor much of the media seems to have understood over the course of Obama's 2 terms. He understands that Obama, in his attempts year after year to make peaceful, to work across the aisle with Republicans, was doomed to failure in the vast majority of cases. This is what Bernie Sanders said. He thought he could walk into Capitol Hill in the Oval Office and sit down with John Boehner and Mitch McConnell and the Republicans and say, I can't get it all, you can't get it all, let's work out something that's reasonable, because he's a reasonable guy. He's a pretty rational guy. These guys never had any intention of doing serious negotiating and compromising. I think it took the president too long to fully appreciate that. Now, he says about himself, because this is sort of this lesson being applied to his own political future potentially, I don't have any illusion that I'm going to walk in, and I certainly hope it is not the case, but if there is a Republican House and a Republican Senate, then I'm going to walk in there and say, hey guys, listen, I'd like you to work with me on raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It ain't going to happen. I have no illusion about that. The only way that I believe that change takes place is that tens of millions of people are going to have to stand up and be involved in the political process the day after the election.
Right, so he's talking about a broader, deeper electoral engagement.
Yes,
and
beyond just voting.
Beyond just voting, but I think obviously it begins at the ballot box. And it's just interesting to note that the United States in the last couple of presidential elections has demonstrably lower engagement turnout, call it what you will, than any other...
No, we're number 1. Go on.
...any other country, because, well, I've got... I assume...
Australia has a very high percentage turnout.
Well, yeah, because they have a quota and it's obligatory. But if you look at Western Europe, it runs at around 65, 66%, right? In the United States, it's 55%. That's on a pretty good year.
Presidential elections.
Presidential elections. So, as laudable as that is, as that sounds, because he's talking to the disenfranchised, and I mean the disenfranchised with a small d, right? The people who feel as though they've been let down. So it's about trying to have a rallying cry for them and trying to find a focus for them. But my question is, and this is what Jeremy Corbyn's doing in the United Kingdom, and this is what a lot of these more left tendency, because of this 1%, this 99%, and it is that attempt to rally and enfranchise and give them hope, farm a word, but it's to give them But my question is how realistic really is that? Because there is going to be an element of apathy. It comes in, not to say that the 99% are apathetic. Obviously, Occupy movement demonstrates otherwise, and other kind of peaceful protest movements demonstrate otherwise. But it begins and ends. I mean, I think that in some ways is a kind of a flaw in his approach. For me,
based on recent American history, or not recent, just on American history,
on human nature.
Yeah,
more than anything else.
Well, I would say, first of all, when you said disenfranchised with a small d, I thought you were making a joke about Trump supporters. Actually, but I won't go into details on why I say that.
That's too much of an elaborate joke for me. I swear, I don't get that.
You know what I'm talking about. It is entirely possible. Now, he is getting a huge crowds, which Obama also got. Obama got huge crowds. I would say that Obama was never going to be the president that I thought he was going to be, and maybe Bernie Sanders won't be either. But if he goes in and day 1 and day 2 and day 5 and day 10 does what he says he would do, and does what is required to make it happen in a way that Obama did at times, but he very rarely put as much pressure on Republicans to go along with him as he could have. He chose diplomacy rather than putting pressure on them, using force against them, not literal force, metaphoric force. Those early victories, I think, are how you sustain the enthusiasm that comes during the presidential campaign. And I think that the way our democratic system is set up, it's not structured in a way that makes it easy, certainly. And it's never going to be all of his supporters are staying engaged and involved day after day. But I think that there are things that you could do that Obama did not do that would make it more likely.
To me, this is the best thing Bernie Sanders has said. Because I mean, I get it. The policy stuff is nice, but how you lead is more important. And what the agenda you set is more important. Then you can go about, if you set a good agenda and you lead properly, you can get a good some portion of what you want done. I don't know, Cenk and I have argued about this a lot. I don't know whether it was what was in Obama's heart and what he really wanted, if he could have just done what he wanted, if he had the Politburo with him and they just rubber stamped it, right? I don't know. I think he'd be a little more left probably than Cenk thinks he was, but it doesn't matter what was in his heart. We only know what he did. And what he did was a peculiar belief throughout his first term that he could keep reaching out and that it wouldn't keep getting knocked away.
Yeah.
And that was meaningful. And until after 2012, and really only after the midterms, when I thought this might happen, when he's like, well, now I clearly can't work with these people, right?
Yeah.
Does he realize, well, now I can do whatever I want. Now I can say whatever I want. And a president who came in there in the beginning and wouldn't do a story that I guess maybe we're going to do in the second hour we didn't get to, but you just saw it a little bit here. Cecile Richards, who did really well yesterday, but she made that apology 2 days after.
Yeah.
And you know, it's what we talk about with Democrats frequently, is that capitulate when you're beaten, right?
And when you're wrong.
When you're wrong, sure. But don't capitulate when the other side has bullied you around and they found one thing wrong that you did. When you see the bigger picture, and the bigger picture for Cecile Richards should have been, they made a tape surreptitiously and they are repeating scandalous lies about it, and I'm not going to stand for it. You apologize to me.
Yeah.
You owe me an apology. I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry because of their tone. Their tone? They're scientists. I don't give a shit about their tone. Yeah. What I care about is you trying to hurt poor women in this country. You owe me an apology, right? So Barack Obama has finally started to reckon. Bernie Sanders will go in that manner. Just a mere recognition that these guys don't want to govern. They are not interested in governing. Right. This is not Bob Dole. This is not Howard Baker. This is not Richard Lugar. I say those three guys' names all the time. But those guys, that is an era of Republicans in the legislature. Those guys cared about governing. I disagreed with them, but they'd make deals because they needed to govern. These guys do not care. You cannot negotiate with them. Yeah. The only time you can is when they're so clearly they're going to lose that they will eventually come to the table. And we need a president who sets the agenda to make it possible that they feel politically threatened by not moving.
And by not supporting your agenda, which is something that George W. Bush did.
By not supporting it in a manner that just is being a working opposition.
Yeah, and not stating in the first couple of months of your first term that their mission is to make sure that you accomplish nothing and that your first term is a failure. I mean, they made that clear very early.
That's right, you don't even need their work, their actions. They don't want it. There's half the Tea Party that they want to destroy government. They're not interested in governing. They don't want to govern. They want to ungovern. That's what they think governing is.
Yeah. Yeah, again, we have too many laws already. Why pass new ones?
Right.
No, and so it is reassuring to know that Bernie Sanders, at the very least, indicates that he believes that. And we don't have a lot of executive experience from Bernie Sanders to go on. But in his public speaking and in his interviews, he does not back down. When you ask him a very specific question about his policies that other Democrats might be sort of uncomfortable answering in a certain way because they're going to say that I'm a socialist or something like that. No, he just answers. He answers immediately. He doesn't think about it for a second. He just says it.
He is saying, I know they're going to say I'm a socialist.
Yeah.
Right? I know going in, so I don't care. It's not going to. I'm not going to govern like, oh, don't call me a socialist, right?
Yeah.
It's not. So I like that recognition. It tells me about the seriousness of him and about his cagey observation about what's happening politically. An observation I am hardly alone in. Thousands of us have made. Very few people in Washington appear to have made what is a scandalously obvious observation. At least Bernie Sanders has made it.